Historically, you picked where you would get hurt the most. Now, there's been laws on the books around the world that prevented compliance with certain U.S. sanctions for years. They've never been enforced. But actually, if you look at what the U.S. has done over the last year, there's only been one enforcement action at the federal level for sanctions violations. Historically, there'd be 10 to 15 at this time in the year, and these can be billion-dollar enforcement actions. Enforcement's at an all-time low. The EU rhetoric is pretty significant about what they're going to do from an enforcement standpoint, so it's almost a race to see who can levy the first action for violation of these new regimes.
Listen, it's early in the United States. It's a little complicated, but this is very important, which is there are new rules, to your point, coming into effect in the EU, which, as I understand them, correct me please if I'm wrong, that effectively make it illegal to comply with both U.S. and European sanctions. But what if they conflict with each other? If you're running a business in America and Europe, you're going to be doing something effectively illegal on one side or the other almost automatically now.
It's impossible to comply with
Heads
both.
I win, tails you lose.
It's impossible to comply with both. And there were laws. That EU statute that was resurrected was focused on Cuba from '96. It was never enforced. They amended it to expand it to cover Iran. But again, there is that complexity. If you are a global company, you cannot be on the right side of both of these regimes.
So what do you do then? If I've got a viewer right now who's watching Worldwide Exchange, they're a CEO of a company that does business in Europe. We just had one on, Dick Wild, Janice Henderson. You've got a business doing business in Europe and the United States. You're effectively going to be breaking the law no matter what you do come October.
You have to go off historical precedent. There's been laws on the books in different countries that have been enforced, and there's been laws that haven't. So you really need to focus on where you can feel the most pain. The U.S. has levied $20 billion of sanctions enforcement actions in the last 10 years. The EU have only levied a handful. So if you're going to go off of history, you're going to focus on U.S. compliance. But again, enforcement in the U.S. is extremely low lately, and that's not just an OFAC, that's pretty universal right now. So this does make it a bit more complicated because the EU member states are talking about enforcement in their respective nations.